Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Pleased to see everyone joining. Just to get us started, and as a brief introduction, I'm Anurag Bhalla, co-founder of Outsized. Outsized, for those that aren't already aware, is a professional freelance marketplace that brings together large enterprises and high-quality independent talent across Asia and Africa. I'm really excited today to host this event and our wonderful guests that you can see on screen. We have an awesome panel who bring with them a diverse set of experiences from global MNCs, big consulting, and big tech. And with that, they bring great depth of unique perspectives and insights and all things people related. I'll now ask each of them to introduce themselves. So we'll kick off, Fiona.
Wonderful. Thanks, Anurag, and wonderful to be here and excited to join my colleagues on this panel. A little bit about myself. I've been with Manulife for about 2.5 years and currently based out of Singapore, working with our global businesses and global functions across Asia segment. I also take on a Asia talent role, which is a lot of my passion, if those of you who have had the pleasure of meeting before. I don't come from insurance, so I've spent probably half my career, actually most of my career, I'd say, in fast-moving goods companies, and so have had great opportunities working alongside excellent leaders who always top of mind think about talent and some of the opportunities that we'll have a chance to discuss more in greater detail today. Somehow came across Anurag and Outsized some time ago, and been a great partner of ours here at Manulife, and so thank you for that, Anurag, and great to be here again. So
thank you, Fiona.
Great. I'll go next. So I'm Kirsty. I'm the Director of Talent for Oliver Wyman in Asia. I've been in Asia for about 11 years now. No, 6 years now. Oliver Wyman for 11 years. Started my career in London, so as a recruiter. So I've gone full circle, sort of recruiting for SAP HR contractors into client side, and now working with Anurag and team to build talent pools to serve my businesses. So real passion for people. I do enjoy the talent side of things and really developing people, but also solving problems. And for me, the talent agenda is very much a real-time solving problem agenda, and one we shall need to think about.
Aki, we'll
Awesome.
hand over.
Yeah, thanks, Anurag, and thanks for having us. My name is Aki Taha. I am originally from New York, actually. I was born in Nigeria, raised in New York, and got to work in Guatemala, China, and the Middle East prior to moving to Singapore, where I'm now based, and have lived for the past 10 years. Lived and worked here in Singapore. I've spent really the entirety of my career in tech, fairly evenly across, 15 years, call it, across Google, Uber, and Netflix most recently. And then in different recruiting roles, like you, Kirsty, HR roles, recruiting leadership roles primarily. And then last year in 2022, a co-founder and I, Usman Sheikh, we started TalentStories, which is largely a content company. We put out a weekly newsletter and a podcast, and we also consult to companies and teams and organizations, leaders wanting to build world-class teams. I think TalentStories started as a missing conversation about work. I think we were sort of perplexed about the lack of intent/thoughtfulness that individuals tended to bring to work, but also leaders and organizations tended to be inflicted by too. And I think after a year of writing and consulting, we've kind of come to a place where we think fundamentally work has changed, and leaders and organizations maybe have changed a little less so. And that's why we're so excited to get the chance to be a part of this on Rock.
Thank you, Aki. Thank you, Fiona and Kirsty. Excited about today. So just to set the scene for the conversation, today's event and discussion really is within the context of an increasingly volatile environment, uncertain environment, and therefore an increasing focus for both organizations and individuals to be agile and fleet of foot, and the impact that has on new and emerging talent models. Also connected to that, I think we can all agree there's been a fundamental shift in the the dynamics and the relationships between organizations and individuals, how we think about work, how we see work, and indeed what work actually needs to be done with the emergence of new technology disrupting skill segments. So there's a lot of disruption happening, but what we wanted to focus on was some real tangible practitioners out there rolling their sleeves up, trying new things, trying different things, some things working, some things not, and sharing some of those insights with the audience. So given all of that, we'll kick off with our first section of the agenda, which is really all about how the relationship between individuals and their employers is changing, and what is really driving that change. What's driving the change from a business perspective, and what's the change on the talent side. So I'll throw that out to Fiona first, just to get us kicked off.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I know, Anurag, you, myself, and others have had a lot of different discussions on this front. I'd say, what we've learned over the last many years, but especially in the last 2-3 years, is we're never really there to figure out what it is 100%, right? People, talent, organizations continue to, be very agile. And I think this element around meeting people where they are at the moment becomes very important, so that we continue to create, right, a culture and a workspace that allows us, right, not only to achieve business demands, but also personal demands. I'd say, if I just looked at, obviously, Manulife right now, I think some of the good things we are doing is really thinking through, what does hybrid mean? What does flexibility mean? We're also seeing this idea and this concept around, right, working in a much more agile way. And that's not just about location of roles, right? That's also about giving opportunities for stretch opportunities, right? Stretch assignments that force us to think a little bit differently around our day-to-day. And how this really comes to play is, if you survey enough talent who decide to leave an organization, oftentimes it's not that they're leaving. We always say, right, you're leaving bad managers. But what we're seeing in the last 2-3 years is people just want a bit of change, right? And they don't feel like they're getting this change in the organization, so they feel a need to go somewhere else to get this change. But if you then complement that with an agile approach of development and opportunities, right, you don't have to leave. But this requires two-way dialogue of organizations being clear on, what is required, right? What does organic and inorganic growth look like within a business? And for the employees to be very transparent, right, also about what is required to give them that new experience. And I think this also means, right, stepping outside of a comfort zone, right? So if you're long-term in one function, right, within an area, and if there's a broadening experience to go get, right, how do we create that? So I often try to share with people, don't think about a role, but think about experiences, right? Because roles tomorrow could not exist. This role that, you've been working 10 years to get, tomorrow could disappear, right? But if you get the right experiences, right, kind of thinking about this relationship with your employer, your manager, you could be gaining experiences that will prepare you for something that we don't even know will exist in 5 to 10 years, right? So I think talent are becoming much more demanding and much more knowledgeable, right? There's so much more data and information out there. How do we keep that dialogue and openness so that we know how to meet, right, the demands of talent as well as business?
Yeah, I think that's a super point. I mean, we've definitely seen that in our dialogue with talent around, one, the accumulation of skills and knowledge as opposed to roles and job descriptions and job titles, for sure. And then also a change in identity in terms of much more aligning the identity to skills as opposed to organizational brand. But Kirsty, if I take that into a consulting environment, I mean, you guys, in terms of accumulation of knowledge and skills at high pace, that is what consulting is about. So you're delivering that. So is it a different, from a consulting sector? Is it a different expectation, a different demand that you're seeing? What's changing in the consulting space that may be different?
Yeah, so we are definitely seeing that COVID taught people things they didn't think was possible are completely possible. So the whole pushback around there's no way we could do consultancy without being on our client sites. We know that's completely not true anymore. We can definitely deliver. The desire to do that, though, is maybe not there from the business side. But what we're seeing is actually a bit of a shift to people having a bit more psychological safety. And as Fiona said, being a bit more honest with us about what they're coming into consulting for. So actually having an open dialogue with us. I'm only here for 3 years, what you're going to give me, which we never used to see before. It was I'm here for partnership and I'm going to do that. And then they'd leave and we'd be really surprised. So what we're definitely seeing at the moment is a generational shift of people who are much more open to being honest about their longer term intentional career paths. And that enables us to do a number of different things, which is to actually say, yeah, we can deliver on that. This is how we're going to do it. Or actually, we can't deliver on that, but this is what we can deliver on. And these are the trade-offs that we're going to make. So it's been really interesting to see just how that shift is. And then seeing a whole generation of people join consultancy and never have met a client is incredibly interesting, because that is also shaping people's career around, do they want to travel again? How is that going to happen? We're seeing people come into boardrooms and be just in awe of having real life conversations and what people are, because they've never really seen them for 2 or 3 years. So I think we're definitely seeing that shift. I don't know how it's going to go. I'm watching it keenly.
And both of you have mentioned talent driving change, both in terms of their mindset around careers and then also around their expectations around, say, for example, flexibility or, how does that align to organizations' ability to deliver that? Or organizations' expectations, what they want from their talent? Are organizations changing their expectations, and are they aligned, or are they conflicting?
Aki, do you want to go, or do you want us to?
Yeah, I'll take a stab.
Yeah,
I would. Yeah, I think. I don't think they're aligned just yet. I think it sounds like even here, I think both parties are sort of feeling one another out. It sounds like with a bit more candor than in years past, which is great. I think fundamentally, I mean, the original question even was what caused this shift in the nature of the relationship. I absolutely think the pandemic and COVID that Kirsty mentioned, I think there was a very real erosion of trust that sort of came into play during the pandemic vis-a-vis the sort of long time party line of needing to be physically present in order to be productive, and just a whole bunch of fundamentals of work got called into question during those COVID years. We mentioned some of the generational differences, which I think are real and not understated, certainly vis-a-vis just the size, for instance, of Gen Z, as well as the fact that Gen Z is working with millennials and with Gen X and sometimes with boomers, right? So 3 to 4 generations per office sometimes, and oftentimes those Gen Xers are the bosses, right? And the younger folks that they're managing have very different, very real values, work values, I think, than many of us, I'm a Gen X, might have brought to the office years ago. And then the last point is, I think there's just been a total shift in leverage as a result, right? Like I think employers are used to having that leverage full stop. And I think a lot of what we're seeing now is a back and forth, a renegotiation now that there's frankly a labor shortage. I think it's fair to say, and employees find themselves more in the driver's seat than they have in quite a long time. So certainly,
I think that's a great point. I think the power dynamics are shifting all the time, from one side to the other. The interesting point you made there, I think, is the generations of different types of talent within a large organizations that think about work and have a very different relationship with work, right? And actually having all of them within your organization all operating at the same time can be quite complicated. I'm interested in the emotional component of that. So I don't know, any of you can jump in on it because you've all worked at very large enterprises, but have you seen a change in the emotional relationship between an organization and an employee? Is it now just transactional, it's just a value transfer, or is there do you still feel that, organizations really wanted to always have this emotional connect and people always wanted to feel very deeply embedded? Is that still there? Is that gone?
I can only speak from what we see, and I think we've had to really rethink about who we are. So relaunch our values to make sure that people are really bought into those, show people the value of coming back together and having the purpose of doing so. I'm not seeing the shift to complete transactional employment yet. And I think we have to also take into account the fact that Asia is a huge place, and what works in Australia is not working in China, for example, where you've still got the stigma of asking for flexible working or part-time working, or the old timers who were talking about when they walk to school with no shoes on and expect everyone else to do the same. People aren't willing to exchange from that for the same way that they used to. So money isn't the only thing that people want anymore. I think they actually want more from their organizations than what they used to. So if anything, it's become, in my experience, a much deeper connection. And you have to do that to keep people. Otherwise, they're just going to go and follow the money.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, I think so Gallup does a survey, which many of you are probably quite familiar with, on their 12 questions. And this is the first time I've experienced Gallup up close and personal. In the past, I'd always heard a lot about it, but most of my other employers have used, in-house surveys. But, the 12 questions actually apply, and the engagement, right? I look at Manulife, and the engagement and the culture is very, very strong. But I think, Kirsty, to your earlier point, people are wanting more. It's not just about strong engagement, but it's also, as I have conversations with our colleagues, there's a lot more ambition around learning and feedback, right? They crave knowing how they're doing, not to wait, once a year, twice a year. They constantly want, reinforcement, and not so much the pat on the back, right? It's really, they're open to the feedback because they want to continue to learn and grow, right? Genuineness around learning and growing is a hot topic. And so I think as we think about the future and think about, right, how to prepare for the future, I do think there's a lot around capability building, right? Because if we're not preparing, right, the capabilities for tomorrow, then we're probably going to be, right, really experiencing this shortage of talent, even in-house, right? Because there's so much development built from the last 2 years, and if we don't think carefully, right, how to continue to build upon that, I think it's a big risk. But yes, I think when I interview talents or, right, leaders who are coming into the organization, the questions are very different, right? And it's also about experiences, and not just about, right, and as we assess talent, it's also not just for this role, it's what else can they do beyond this current role that we're interviewing for. So I think that two-way partnership, and, not just the money, but also what is the long term, right? So on the one hand, people, they crave that engagement, right? It's not just a job anymore. It's really where I spend a lot of my time, right? So I need to like the people I'm working with, and I need to enjoy what I'm doing, right?
Yeah, they're judging us on different things. So they're judging us on our carbon neutrality, and they're judging us on our...
These are examples of different values, right? They want more, and they want different. And those differences are manifesting in the questions that we're seeing on the way in, and the questions that they have during performance reviews. And I've been thinking about this, and Kirsty made the point that Australia is not China. I think generally, like, generational awareness is the new cultural awareness. Like, I think most of us wouldn't waltz into an office in Japan. I'm an American, right? And just assume that, my culture is the culture and I don't need to flex or bend. I think increasingly, I've been trying to take more and more note, like, who's in the room with me, and what are the values that they might be bringing, not necessarily the country values, but the generational values. How might those be different from me, especially if I have a leadership role to play?
Yeah. Common language is a big one here. So think if you think about, like, steps that people can take. We've really done a lot of work on common language and what does that mean to try and bridge that generational gap. So just, okay, we're talking about work-life sustainability. What do you actually mean by that? And how, as Fiona says, meet people where they are, so that at least when we go into our meetings and we talk about that I'm burned out, the Gen Zers aren't like, oh my God, here they go again. And the Gen Z, so we just can have that real language where people know what they're talking about. And that's been incredibly important for us.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that point. And I think that links quite nicely. If we take that change, if you're a HR talent leader within an organization, you've got this changing animal of, new talent or changing expectations on the talent side. And it feels like you've got the business also demanding and expecting different things. So I'm interested to get some insights on one, what are the new, problems, different problems that you're being thrown as the HR lead, right, around the leadership table, and the business is saying, well, this is what we need from you. What is that changing expectation? What are they asking for you differently now? Has it changed? And then linked to that, what are some of the new playbooks, the new things you're trying, new models you're trying to experiment with to try and meet those changing expectations of both the business and the talent market? So I'll throw that out to Kirsty first.
Gladly. So I think the business want more from me. They want more and different. So what used to happen isn't good enough anymore. So the excuses that I might have are not excuses, but I talk about capacity and how my team can't perform or can't deliver that. And what I'm told is find a way to do that, which never used to sort of happen before. But I think the point I made earlier on around how COVID has now showed everyone that we can pivot on a hairpin and do things. And my response to that always is, and how are you going to help me? Because that's what happened in COVID. It felt like everyone was in this together. We were sort of holding each other's hands through the change. It never felt like it was one party in it by themselves. But I think the big thing that I've had to sort of really pivot on here is to be listening to my leaders. So I'm an expert in what I do. I think I am. I've been doing this for a long time. But really just hearing what they have to say around the challenges they're facing on client sites, for example. So the skills that we would normally have had that we may not have, or the way the clients are thinking about things ever so slightly differently, has been massive for us. And to do that, so I've had to carve more of my time out to listen, which feels like I should do it anyway, but usually you're in this problem solving mode of, oh, okay, I've got a solution for that. Yeah, I've got a person for that. Yeah, let me kick off a search. But in this instance, it's just listening and trying to draw up the themes and what can we do? And I think the playbooks for us have been like, how can we get ahead of the problem? So how can we think about our partnerships in the business? Because I can't do this alone. Like I'm not Wonder Woman. I can't make all of these things happen. So I've really had to think differently about how I engage other areas of the business to help me solve my problems, which I never really had to do before. So my business impact teams or my commercial teams or those type of things, but also how I can build relationships early with people like Outsized who can help me pivot on a hairpin because I can't do it myself. But then leveraging other people's experience, which I think sometimes as a company, you don't want to do those type of things, but it's been invaluable for us to just make sure that we're building early and communicating really, really well, back to that common language of, so what do you actually want? What are you telling me? And me listening to them.
Oh, excellent. Awesome. And then Fiona, I'll go to you next in terms of Manulife, when you're sitting around that table in your weekly or leadership stand up, what are the changing narratives coming to you? What are the changing problems being thrown in your direction?
Yeah, I think fundamentally it's always the same two questions, which is, right, do we have the talent and capabilities to succeed, right? Because if you don't have the right talent, sometimes you have the right people in wrong jobs. Sometimes, right, it's time for a move so that you don't want to lose the talent to another organization. So I think constantly we have to keep talent at the center, as right business would say, we keep customer at the center of everything we do. But internally, I do think, right, it's important for us to keep the cadence in talking about our talent, to keep the cadence in really understanding what it is that, our talents want. But importantly, it's also taking the time to assess the readiness of the organization, right? So where you may need to make some talent adjustments, right? Because perhaps their capability has now exceeded, right, the role that they're in. And so how do we intentionally create opportunities for them to move? But there's also the flip side, right, where we may be going into territories requiring new capabilities that potentially we don't have in the organization, and how do we quickly go and build that, right? And Anurag, where you've come in is really helping us to bring in some experienced capability where we might need to go quickly, that we might not be able to achieve internally fast. So I think fundamentally the questions I get is not that I get, but I would say the questions I would pose to myself and the team is really, do we have the right talent and do we have the right capabilities? And if not, what is your buy, build, and I'd say borrow strategy, because sometimes you might need to borrow some resources somewhere in order to build that capability fast.
Oh, nice. And Aki, you've worked at some very progressive, innovative companies that would position themselves as very much being ahead of the curve when it comes to people-related aspects. And then obviously through TalentStories, you look at a lot of the sort of trends happening. What do you see as being some of the big themes a talent leader is currently trying to grapple with in the market?
Yeah. I think that I love the way you framed the question, Anurag, in terms of those tensions, right? Like, I think talent leaders.
Aki might be frozen.
We lost for a little bit. Oh, we got you back. You're back now. It was a very nice pose we got you in. But carry on.
So we're navigating these tensions. I think most leaders still want the same things. They want results. They want talent. They want speed, right? I think if anything, what's changed is certainly what I'm trying to bring to conversations, and I have the luxury of being a consultant, is that's great. But again, the world has changed, right? It's deeply uncertain right now. There's a lot of fear that employees have. And my question is to them in terms of navigating the tensions or trying to push back is, what is the clarity that you're providing in terms of flexibility that you offer, purpose that you offer, learning that you offer, story that you offer, empathy that you offer, clarity of performance, right? And so just trying to balance out some of the asks and explain why. The other thing we see from leaders is just a lot of confusion, right? They really don't get why they don't have the leverage that they did. They really don't get why people quiet quit. And so a lot of it is trying to explain that. And it's also why having these tools, right, is what I would call them, whether it's an outsized, whether it's just relationships, being able to source different and new pools of talent, having those tools in your tool belt as an HR practitioner, I think is huge ROI right now.
Sorry, Kirsty, were you gonna?
Yes, so I think there's a point to build on that is around the leaders as well. I've lost my ability to fortune tell because I've got no basis on what this new world looks like for me. So I used to be able to say, 20-30% attrition, yeah, it'll be fine. I can get them from this place, that place. But now this is completely uncharted. So I think to your point, Aki, around sort of there's a bit of confusion and people are a bit lost. I think that we've just lost that ability and everyone's exhausted as well. So I know for the last couple of years, people haven't really recovered from that yet. They're still in this sort of, okay, build back, let's what's going on mode. So it's just, I think that I've been trying to cut my leadership a little bit of slack when it comes to this and ask for the same, just to cut through some of that confusion. But yeah, I wish I could tell the future like I used to be able to.
No, it's a great point. And one question that has come up with some of these new models. So, we have a premise at Outsized that, okay, so if organizations need to be more agile, more fleet of foot, need to be increasingly resilient to actually just survive and thrive in a very changing environment, right? They need more agility in their talent models, right? And in Asia, Africa, most organizations are much further behind in that agility from a talent model than, say, a UK, US, European market. So there's a long way to go. And individuals also are increasingly saying, well, if the security of a permanent role is no longer as secure as it used to be, why don't I go and grab a lot more control of my own career to accumulate those skills and experiences as quickly as, and work with who I want that has a purpose match, a values map when I want, and also balance my lifestyle, right, in the way that I envisage it. So you're seeing this sort of drive on both sides. But then you've got the potential trade-off and the risk. So when I talk to organization leaders, one question that came up a lot, and I want to put out to the group here is, okay, so we're talking about a lot of the positives. Okay, individuals get to accumulate lots of experience and map out their skills roadmap, and organizations get agility and they can build these new models and work with each other in a different way. But actually, what about the risks? So for an organizations have continually wanted to, obviously there's concerns around privacy and confidentiality of data, about systems, about IP, and previously that was somewhat felt it was protected by having permanent employees in your building that you retained, and therefore that knowledge was remained in the company and it wasn't leaked. And now when you've got these other types of individuals coming in, potentially leading big pieces of work, what does that do from a risk perspective? And, Fiona, Kirsty, you work in quite regulated environments. What's the view there in terms of how you mitigate some of the risk, especially within potentially business, say risk compliance teams that are looking at this and saying, well, how are we controlling this new model? Mm-hmm. Have you come across any pushback there on a risk perspective?
Yeah, like you said, and maybe I'll jump in here, and then for my colleagues there, insurance is a highly regulated industry, right? So every decision we make, right, has to go through many levels and different approvals, etc. But there is so much information out there today, right? I mean, starting in November, and all of a sudden it's been a hot topic is, right, ChatGPT, and right, you go on ChatGPT and you can ask any question, right? Now, whether or not the answers are 100% accurate, right, TBD. And I think as, right, this tool continues to advance and, right, they continue to build in more AI and more data, it will become more accurate over time. So a lot of the risk factors maybe go back to the fundamentals of, right, it's not how you behave or act when somebody's watching. It's really when somebody's not watching, and what do you do? But, from a company risk and integrity standpoint, thankfully I've worked with great organizations where you do the right thing, right? Meaning there's consequences for not doing the right thing. And those consequences, right, can be, I think in this day and age, there's a lot more proactive action taken. Right? In the past, there may be a lag in when you find out something happens, and now it's just pretty immediate. So the act of, right, putting your colleagues and the organization at risk, I think, hiring the right people, having, right, the best metrics, but also knowing, right, you're hiring people who will operate, right, in the most positive intentioned way, right? So I think we don't put ourselves in a situation where we create risk or that we would want to create risk, right? But I think from a data standpoint, I mean, there's just so much information out there today, right? And I don't know that we can protect against that, unfortunately, right? As much as we try.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's been very difficult to balance the needs of a really agile workforce and the business wanting to move super, super quick while being as compliant as we can. And then for us, we had to work out which risks we were comfortable with waiting to see what the answer was versus what are our hard lines that we're not going to cross. I think the biggest thing that moved the dial for us was to start treating our agile hires as permanent hires. So really thinking about the recruitment process that we were going through to get people. Because I think if there's a fundamental mismatch in values and just someone being a bit strange, you just don't trust them as much as you normally would do. And that's sort of human nature. So really making sure that the values piece was there and starting early. So the one thing we could control is building talent pools and having access to people much, much earlier. So you're not always on that back foot around, oh, who've we got? Okay, he'll do. That person's fine. Yeah, put her in this role. So I think time was something that we allowed that helped us be a bit more compliant in that area as well.
And Aki, you're just about to jump in.
Yeah, it was just a thought triggered by what both Fiona and Kirsty were saying. I was just thinking through an example that I think is relevant, very recent, and I can kind of deliver a knock on my own tech industry. But if you look at the way this most recent round of layoffs played out, I think they were executed in a very, very sort of risk-averse way from the standpoint of I mean, we all read about it, right? And that's the point here. Everyone read about it. The way these decisions came on from down high, 20-year employees were just, their access card didn't work. And just the inability to even say goodbye or thank you to employees as a result of a RIF, by the way, right? A reduction in force. I think, that's what I see is those corporations sort of flexing into just sort of overgoing on the risk. And then one wonders about the huge public million-strong perception of those layoffs. So hopefully, my hope is more and more companies can go the other way and learn how to lean more into risk versus what we just saw in this round.
And Aki, when you're talking to some of the HR leaders and you're talking about some of the new things they want to do, which is always fun and exciting, do you find there's also a conflict between, hey, we want to do all this stuff, but actually, I'm not sure we're ready. Do you find there's that conflict at the moment?
Yeah, there is, for sure. I think, certainly the culture of the organization is going to be either propelling them into that risk or trying something new or not. But it's a constant conversation. It's almost like a Cambrian explosion of tools and options to be able to explore. I do feel a lot of the HR folks I talk to feel like they have one arm sort of behind their back in terms of actually being able to go out and explore these new models, explore the new software. But for every practitioner that's one arm behind the back, there are others who are just like Kirsty's saying, like, I can't predict what I'm going to have for lunch tomorrow, much less what the attrition rate is going to be in a year's time. And so they're able to now take more risk, which is fabulous.
And a couple of interesting questions. I'm going to throw them out here, actually. Kirsty, you made a point around value fit. We've heard culture. We've heard purpose alignment. There's a question that came up around, actually, for this, you've got your, traditional permanent employee, and you've got an independent, coming in, working with you for a period of time. Actually, how important is it for you to integrate them into your culture, your values, your purpose? How important is it for you? Have you had circumstances where the individual's like, well, I don't want any of that. I just want to come in and do my job and leave. I don't want to be branded, So are you seeing any, have you tried some things there around different experiences, aligning experiences, treating them differently, treating them the same? Like, it'd be interested in some reflections there.
Yes, definitely. So I think the fundamental is, I think it's the thing that Fiona said, is culture is the stuff that happens when nobody's watching. And a lot of people aren't watching our contractors the same way they're watching our permanent staff. So I think really making sure that they are part of the team is huge. But I think we need to really think about the paradigm shift that's happening and why we're sort of here today, which is this is the future of the workforce. And if we treat these people badly, they will not come back. And unless you're using your contractors as a real sort of plug to plug a gap and you're building that workforce on top of them, you need to treat people well, and you shouldn't be differentiating really on how you do that, whether they're being permanent or not permanent. Now, there are some regulations that mean you can't send people to training and you can't do this and you can't the other, because then we're all open up to tax sort of liabilities. But then just the day to day, like if everyone's gone out for coffee, why aren't they coming out for coffee? But I think it all depends on what you're also buying them for. So I think if you're buying people, I shouldn't use that. If you're bringing people in to supplement your workforce to serve your clients, it's your name on the head of this. So you need to make sure that what's being produced is good quality. I think if you've got sort of someone sitting in the background, perhaps sort of crunching some data, you can be a little bit less picky. But we've all got to go to market together. I think you've seen a little bit of this, Anurag. The people who didn't sit with our values are the people.
Yeah, Sorry, Fiona.
Yeah, let me just build on that. And I totally agree. Oh, no, I was just saying, whether it's contractor or engagement, right, they also represent, right, our company at this moment in time. So it's, right, very difficult not to engage them in a way that, when they also go out and represent the work that they're doing, right? There is a Manulife, or there is a Deloitte, there is a other company that they're known to be working for. And as both Aki and Kirsty was, what you were sharing, the one thing that came to mind was around change management. Right, it's an opportunity that we continue to want to do better. So it's not just about rolling out the technology. It's not just about rolling out, right, the new training or the new concept. It's also the change management. And it's one area that I, right, constantly am pushing myself and the team, right, to continue to improve on, because you can have the technology and the most, the next new shiny toy, but if we don't change management, right, that process into the organization in our day-to-day work, that just becomes a tool, right, that nobody knows how to use, and that doesn't quite work with the right efficiency and the return on investment, right, that we'd want to see on whatever process or discipline or technology, right, that we're investing in.
I'll just throw one more thought, I hope, in complement to this. I think I just keep coming back to the word clarity, right? And I look at the ROI you get, for instance, by baking some of the values in, just in terms of an employer brand, right? I think the ability to put out there, this is who we are, this is what we stand for, this is what it means to succeed here. Even for non-full-time employees, I think there's a lot of value in whom you're able to attract. And then for the potential to be able to, I'm going to use the I word, include them, right? I think they still want to be connected. They still want to feel a part of something, just because they're for the most part, just because their payroll is executed differently on the back end. I think there's a huge chance there to be able to offer that belonging, offer that inclusivity, but do it in the right way and respectful of regulations and laws and so on. I don't think they're completely mutually exclusive.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think when we speak to independents, I think there's this component of wanting to be acknowledged as having different needs. So how you assess me, how you onboard me, is different. What I need from you while I'm there is different, right? I'm not trying to build my career over a 5-year period. I'm trying to really execute this piece of work. So getting, access to the right people and systems really quickly is super important to me, right? So there's some different priorities. There's definitely some differences in needs, but they want a choice, especially on the engagement side. So one independent once reflected with me saying, the team went out for lunch and I didn't get invited. Now I might not, actually I wasn't really keen on going, but it was the fact that I wasn't invited, right? I didn't have an option. So almost having an option to engage, and if you really want to commit, really feel part of it, but also being acknowledged as having different needs, right? The organization being able to differentiate you in terms of their processes, their approach is also quite important. I think we just lost Fiona. So just as we try and get Fiona back, so linked to this then, so you've got the sort of, some organizations, you said, Kirsty, different models, right? So it might be, hey, I'm just trying to supplement my core workforce and it's a short-term fix. You've got other organizations really trying to change their operating model, right? Really trying to shift their workforce and think differently about how they execute as an organization. And they're doing it at an enterprise level at scale. There's a big gap between, hey, the one-off and the enterprise at scale, right? We had a question prior to the event. Hey, my organization, this is an HR talent leader, is asking me to think about how do I get from a roadmap from where we are in terms of ad hoc, agile talent coming in to, hey, we want to do this at scale and shift our workforce. I know it's a big question, but any simple steps or guidance to someone in a leadership role in HR trying to actually change their talent model at an enterprise level, where do you start? Aki, do you want to jump in on this one?
I'll offer a thought. That's a great question. Look, I think oftentimes we're experimenting, right? And I think my strategy typically is to find that progressive leader, somebody to willing, for whatever reason, sometimes it's desperation, sometimes it's risk tolerance, sometimes it could be any of a number of reasons, but they're willing to take that bet with you and sort of be that test case. And then you learn. Look, at a minimum, you learn from the experiment, right? But in success, when it goes well, then it's storytelling time, right? It's look what so-and-so did over here with X experiment with agile talent. And then I think smart leaders, competitive leaders will oftentimes pick up on that. And that can be a great way to scale the experiment. Or worst case, the experiment doesn't work, but you've learned, right? And you can share those learnings.
Yeah.
Agreed. I think back to Aki's point about clarity, though, isn't it? You need to know why you're doing this and whether people are actually on board and where your starting point is. So is this, you're growing the business in this way, or are you completely redefining how you deliver to your customers in this way? And does that mean a riff? Does that mean that you're going to sort of exit people? Because if you do, then you're starting from a very different place. Your employer brand needs work. You need to have a really good story around what you're doing. But I can't echo enough of what Aki said, is start small, get your experiments, do your lab, test and learn, and then apply and scale that as you go, but also bring in your partners. So make sure that you know where you can actually get these people from, because it's great to say that we're going to move to this model over here and this is what it's going to look like. But if you don't even know where you're going to get the skills from or what those skills are, you're starting from sort of way behind.
Yeah. No, that's
and ask for help. I think that's the big thing. I think as leaders, we don't often ask for help because it sits on our plates. But actually, what we should be doing. Oh, sorry, my dog is going crazy. What we should be doing is really sort of thinking about who can support us on the journey, both internally, externally, and how we think about our partners. And that's not just partners in a contingent base, but those businesses we can partner with who at scale can provide us with what we need. So developers, for example, can we go and find a partner with that?
So linked to that, Kirsty, who, in your view, leads that enterprise level transformation of a talent model? Is it the business driving that, saying, hey, we need this new approach, HR, go and deliver it for us? Or is it HR talent leaders saying, hey, this is the strategic vision around people that you need to help us execute if you want to deliver your strategy? You know, who leads that? Have you got a view? Anyone got a view on that?
Can someone else go? My dog is going crazy.
I can speak only from firsthand experience.
Yeah.
I think and I hope it's the HR, the talent leader who makes the push, right? I think the best leaders I've worked with, oftentimes they don't know what they don't know. And they probably won't know what they don't know about a cutting edge solve for people. I mean, it's one thing if it's a more basic solution, but if it's something more cutting edge, I think the onus is on us as talent leaders to be able to go out there, learn about these tools, learn about these resources, vet them, like Kirsty said, with intent, right? And then find that leader that you can partner with to be able to take that bet with. That has been a great model for me. I don't know if others have a take.
Yeah. Kirsty, how are you doing over there? Are you
the crazy schnauzer? So I would completely agree, and I think I'm going to go and find a.
Fiona, I don't know if you can you hear us okay over there? So the question was around.
Now I can. I'm so sorry. I don't know what's.
The question was around whether the leadership and the driving of new models around new talent models at an enterprise level, should talent HR be driving that in terms of saying in business, hey, to execute your strategy, you need these new talent models and talent capabilities? Or is it business saying, hey, HR talent, you need to deliver us this new talent model, go and do it? What's your view on that in terms of who's driving that agenda? Oh.
I can go. I've got a quiet spot while we get Fiona back. So I think the point you raised around, so I think you're making a difference between us and them. And actually what you should have is HR at the strategic point, at the point of where we're deciding what that's going to be, because I don't think you can make these decisions in isolation without understanding what your growth plans are, what's actually possible. So I think you sort of have to get the right leader involved at the right point around actually defining what the strategy is, and then it becomes your problems. It's not HR's problem, it's not the business's problem, it's just the problem we're trying to solve.
That's a great point. So Aki, when you talk to HR leaders, talent leaders, or from your past experience, are they Do they have a seat at that table?
Increasingly, yes. Maybe not to the extent many of us would like, but increasingly, yes. In part because of where we began the conversation today, right? Like, this has become really hard, really uncertain, really unpredictable work, right? Because that leverage has shifted. I think, knock on wood, you do see more and more talent leaders at the table able to work hand in hand or fist in glove with the business to figure out what the problem is, and then try to experiment towards a people solve for it.
Yeah, and interestingly, when we've been talking to a lot of our stakeholders, what they've said is it's been a bit of a shock to the system, because they've sort of been at the table trying to demand this sort of strategic influence, and then suddenly all eyes are on them saying, what are you doing about this problem? And they're like, oh my God, I'm not sure I know the answer. And now that it's almost flipped, completely the other way, where, strategic drive, all of it comes down to people and capability, right? So a lot of the pressure now sits with those talent leaders. So I guess it's a bit of a moment in time now to sort of grab hold of that opportunity.
Agreed.
So Fiona, I don't know if you heard much of that. Are you with? You got a connection there? No, I think we've lost her again. So I think what we'll do is we'll push on to the next segment. We've got about 8 minutes left. So I think linking through new talent models, new type of workforce, new expectations. If we focus in on this new independent segment, that most organizations are really strategically growing now, right? In Asia and Africa, they are shifting their model significantly to having a big proportion of their workforce being independent.
So I'm now back. I don't know if I'm a bit choppy, so please do let me know.
I will let you know. I'll try and bring you in. And increasingly in the market, more and more people are moving into being independents. They're working on an independent basis. But as we've reflected previously in our separate discussions, the world isn't really made for an independent. It's made for a permanent employee. So both within an organization and broader in the market, what are some of your views around, one, the infrastructure that's needed? And that could be linked to, for example, the compliance and regulatory environment, but also just the overall infrastructure that's needed to help this model actually thrive. And two, what are some of the new things you're seeing around the corner? So what are some of the disruptive, themes and drivers that are coming around the corner you think the audience should be aware of? So we'll start with the first one in terms of infrastructure. We've definitely got a view on it, but I'll chuck it out to you guys first and see what you think.
I'm going to give you a very US-centric answer, which I apologize for in advance. But I think the single biggest nudge that all this work could take forward would be to find a way to decouple insurance, health insurance, from one's full-time employer in the United States, which is such the end count of folks just locked into those relationships is really staggering. And it's been like that for decades, right? Since the end of World War II. And so that would be in my opinion, a massive win, a massive lift. It's one of the biggest reasons why there remains sort of infrastructure friction, to use your term.
For sure. And I think if you look at some of the, you'd usually expect a slight risk premium, when you hire an independent, because actually a lot of those benefits get removed. And when we talk to independents, the protection side of the financial services spectrum is definitely the higher priority one. Cash flow is another challenge, just in terms of how they're paid is different to regular payroll. So cash flow can be a challenge, but protection is definitely something that a lot of people get concerned about, losing my protection. The other components that we see as big drivers are, hey, I lose my training and skills development coaching. I don't have someone looking out for me saying, hey, do this course, do that course. The other aspect is around community. Hey, I lose my support infrastructure, and a lot of people talk about that support infrastructure that gets taken away. So there are some of the things that we get told on quite a regular basis around things that they miss being an independent and find difficult. Anyone else got any reflections on that in terms of overall infrastructure needed to help this segment?
I think there needs to be a general shift in commitment from the business to contractors. So
yeah, it was interesting.
Carry on, Fiona.
Oh, I think there's a lag. I think you'll have to go. You go, Kirsty.
Go ahead.
The lag.
Please finish.
No-
I'll
no
chime
problems.
in. I don't know what's going on.
Okay. The point I was going to make is contractors are at the whim of the business. So when it's hot, they're really busy. When it's cold, they're the first people to go because it can be seen as a cost. So I think there needs to be a real shift in the infrastructure around moving independence away from a cost base into a sort of pseudo employment valued employee basis, because I think if that keeps happening, you're going to lose the skill out of the market, because they're all going to go back permanent. And then what happens is we have another boom, and then we're all running again to catch up because everyone's had to go back into a permanent job. So I do think we as businesses need to move away from the view of just cost and into something different.
And Fiona, you were talking, I guess, from an insurance angle. Aki mentioned that's one of the big pain points. Have you got a view on that in terms of broader infrastructure?
You might. There's a definite lag. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. What we'll do is we'll move on, Fiona, because I think the lag's a bit too big to be able to bring you in then. So we talked about that overall ecosystem that's needed. Any views in terms of regulatory environment? When I talk about that, accessing talent now, if we say it's more flexible, it's more agile, you're able to bring in talent from different cross-border talent, local talent, I think there's some complexities there around, okay, if I want to leverage, talent globally in different markets at different times for different roles. Kirsty, you probably had some exposure to this, and Aki as well. I mean, what's your view around some of the regulatory environment or legal environment actually surrounding this? And have you had any experience of that?
Yeah, it's my everyday life around how do we do this, especially on a consultancy basis where you're literally moving people around the world. I think again, to my point around knowing your partners and asking for help. So really knowing how you can not get around it, but how you can leverage others who have presence there, for example, or how you can use one of the new platforms that helps you sort of employ people in various countries while you mitigate your own risk is really important. But I think just understanding that risk tolerance and landscape at the beginning is really important, because if not, you could inadvertently be causing an international disaster, which you don't want to do in your own company.
Just a quick personal example. I when I ran around at Uber, honestly, like a bit of a chicken with its head cut off, trying to set up new entities in these new markets during these go early years. It was obviously hard and complex. And you contrast that now with a company like Deal, right? DEEL, if you've seen them, right? Mm-hmm. Which is just an example of a company just responding to the need, Anurag, that you're talking about, right? Like companies, again, if you go back to the fundamental, what I would argue, the fundamental labor shortage, there's just not enough people right in front of me. And so they're kicking and screaming, trying to find ways to be able to scale, to be able to find the people they need, and to do it oftentimes beyond their own border. And in steps a company like Deal has vastly reduced the friction and the risk, I would argue, to being able to hire people in other parts of the world. And, and their business booming reflects the need that's there.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I think just to finish off, we're coming up to the last sort of minute. And what I just wanted to finish with was some final reflection. So I think we probably all agree that this future of work concept, it's not the future anymore, it's here. So we're in this new model. But what are some of the actually new things that are coming around the corner? So the whole hybrid working, remote working, flexible, I mean, that's there. That's just with us today, and we're already in it, and we're trying to navigate it. But what are some of the things that actually HR leaders and also talent need to consider that are coming around the corner that are really potentially going to change this space? Any final reflections on that?
AI, 4-day work week. more people entering the workforce, more people leaving the workforce that were just not planned for. But I think AI is the one that's going to either save us or kill us. I'm not sure which one it is yet, and I'm hoping it saves us and enables all of the other stuff.
And Kirsty, AI and technology in general, from a changing the skills that are needed and in terms of actually taking over a whole gamut of skills that we currently think we need people to do, and potentially creating a whole new set. Is that where you see it coming? Okay.
Yeah, we're doing jobs now that didn't exist 10, 15 years ago because of the rise of technology and the way things have changed. So sort of, if I could, I mean, I've lost my ability to predict the future, but if I could, I think in 10 to 15 years, we're going to see new industries all arising because of AI. And it's going to hopefully readdress the work-life sustainability points that I think we're all facing, which is, do we go and fill that time with something else, which companies often do, or do we actually give that back to our employees? And then do we see more people entering the sort of freelance world because they've got more time on their hands, for example? It's really interesting.
And Aki?
Yeah, I won't. Let's just stick on AI. I think that, it is clearly here. I think we're all trying to figure it out, and should be. I think that, yes, Anurag, to answer your question, it'll sort of elevate a whole bunch of roles, and then to yours, Kirsty, it'll necessitate a whole bunch of new skills that don't exist. I mean, the stats on jobs that don't exist now being the preponderance of jobs in very low number of years are mind-blowing, right? And I think there's also just a whole segment of talent leader, of business leader that needs to figure out how to lead in an AI sort of driven business, full stop, right? And so all of the decision making, the optimization, so much of what we learned and refined over the years is at least at risk. And Kirsty, to your point, and optimistically, I think it could be to our net benefit. At least that's everyone's hope, right? Either way, it's a huge learning curve for all of us.
I hope so. But layer on that most of our leadership are not digital nomads and not digital natives who don't really know how all of this stuff works. How do we affect the strategy that means that all of this happens? I'm interested to see.
Plus one.
I don't know. Hopefully, back through. I see my connection being a bit stronger now. But this whole conversation, I'm so sorry. I don't even know what happened. It's here. The AI. I was watching an interview the other day, and it's not going away. So how do we work differently to adopt and place? And it's getting us.
Oh, we've lost her again. We've lost her. AI has taken over, and she's going to repeat. So I think, I think we've come into the end of the session. Anyway, thank you, Fiona. If you can hear us, Aki, Kirsty, really fantastic session. Love chatting with you as always about all of these emerging topics. I think there's a lot of great comments. A lot of people took away a lot of good insights from the session. If there are questions that anyone on the audience would like to share with the panel, please do send them through to Outsized. We will consolidate them, get them out to the team, and then get you some questions back. If you want to get in touch with anyone in the panel, let me know, and we can make a connect where it makes sense. So thank you again, everyone, and appreciate everyone dialing in, and we will connect again soon. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.